Now, we've been to a few spots where you can see original or recreated trenches, but today we're in a particular unusual spot. We're in the middle of an industrial estate just near Ypres, and we're here to see some trenches that were rediscovered right here in 1992. We're at the Yorkshire Trench and Dugout. So today we're just outside Bosinger, north of Ypres by the Ypres Canal. And we're here to take a look at a spot that was rediscovered in 1992. This entire area has been redeveloped as a large industrial estate since the Great War. But during the war itself, pretty much for the duration of the war, the front lines ran right through this area here. In 1992, an amateur group of archaeologists who are known as the Diggers first discovered the remains of a British trench right here in this area. Between 1998 and 2000, hours were spent digging that out and trying to follow where that trench went. During that time, they also discovered some dugouts that sit right here as well. So this is a really interesting spot. As you first come in here, you can see straight ahead. So over here is the actual kind of dugout trench line that we're going to take a look at. But you can also see where behind it they've marked out where some of the other bits would have been on the back of the trench maps and stuff in this area. But we're going to go and explore, have a look at some of these information panels and see what we can find out. So whether they are entirely original or recreated, it is always an exciting experience to see trenches on the Western Front. So here's what we've come to see. This is the Yorkshire Trench that runs through to the other side of this little area here. Behind it, there is kind of the markings, I guess, of where the next line trench would have been. And if you can see this on the video, runs up through here. But this is the main one that we've come to see. They've also got something here which is quite cool. So you can see kind of how a trench duckboard would have worked. So the idea of this would have been to create some gap between where the guys would have walked and then the actual bottom of the trench. Of course, sometimes these were broken, destroyed, which meant the guys were just left walking in the water underneath. But in theory, these would have worked quite well. It would have had you lifted up off the bottom of the trench and not wading in the water and the mud that would inevitably have sat down there, which for us, we're not going to have to deal with today. So if we start to go in and explore this trench, just before we do, one of the interesting things they have here is these information boards, and you can see some of the pictures of them doing the excavation work. So we talked about the boarding that sat in the bottom of the trench. Well, here you go. Look, some of that remained in there when they started to excavate this trench in 2000. So you can see that's what it looks like, and there you go, that's how it would have fitted into the bottom of a trench. Wow. Okay, so let's move down in here. So the way they've done this is reconstructed this with kind of cement sandbags. So these aren't actual sandbags, of course, they just wouldn't last out here in this environment, but been concreted down. It's really interesting to come through. So one of the key sites that they've got here is that of this. This is a dugout entrance. Now it's currently full of water because the dugout itself was entirely flooded, but if you go and watch the documentary about this area, you can see a lot more about that dugout where they pumped all the water out of it. You can imagine, by the way, this would have filled up with water all the time during the war as well. The guys here would have had to have trench pumps to keep it dry so it was usable the whole time. But I really recommend check out the documentary and you can learn a lot more about what's gone on in this dugout right here. Now, there was fighting in this area before the actual Yorkshire Trench came into being. At the very start of 1915, this section of the front was a little bit quieter than some areas following the First Battle of Ypres. But in July 1915, the British decided to make an attack here to try and move forwards and capture a section of trench known as International Trench in the German line. That was a decision made to improve the kind of tactical situation that they had here. So on the 5th of July 1915, men of the Rifle Brigade, supported by men of the Somerset Light Infantry, attacked here. Now, they moved across and they managed to capture that position. With some ferocious fighting, they managed to consolidate it and hold that line. But in doing so, they had about 300 casualties right here in this area. Now, the lines then remained the same in this area until about early 1916. At that point, the Germans managed to capture a British listening post that was by the canal slightly to the north of here in kind of this direction. That meant that due to kind of the shape of the line here, the Germans could actually fire almost into the side, even slightly to the rear of the British line. With that situation, the decision was made for the British to slightly withdraw, widening no man's land, but they came back and they consolidated this position right here. And that's when the Yorkshire Trench was created and became the British line. Okay, so as we carry on here, moving forwards in the zigzag, and just like other trenches that we've seen, they're not going to be in a straight line. They'll be zigzagged for protection and to stop the damage from artillery fire. So as we come around this side, you come into another section where you can see some of the dugout. Now, to give you an idea of what we're looking at here, this staircase that runs down into the dugout, this is about 10 meters deep and about 20 meters long. So, you know, you're talking a really substantial dugout here. But again, unfortunately, it is full of water right now. So it was sometime in late 1916, early 1917, that the actual Yorkshire Trench and dugout was dug. It first appeared on actual British trench maps, named the Yorkshire Trench in January 1917. And this would pretty much remain as the British frontline position up to the Third Battle of Ypres, mostly referred to as the Battle of Passchendaele, during which men of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers would leave these trenches to go into the offensive. As a result of those actions and the fighting here, men lay all over this area, and in fact it is tragic to think when you look around this area, it is a huge redeveloped industrial park, and it makes you think how many of those men still lay out here in the foundations of those buildings or in the surrounding fields. But to emphasize how many casualties lay in the ground, when the diggers were excavating this area, they came across the remains of 155 casualties from the fighting here. The men they found were British, French and German, and had laid out here in the fields, not to be discovered until more than 70 years after the war. The remains that were found were handed over to the Commonwealth Graves Commission, the German War Graves Commission and the French Embassy. And all of the 155 casualties were buried with full military honours. The various kind of personal effects and things that they found with those bodies, a lot of those were turned over to some of the local museums, and I believe the In Flanders Field Museum and the Hoog Crater Museum have a couple of those bits. I don't know if they're currently on display, but I believe they have some of those within their collection. So one of the things I really like that they've done here, so you've got the trench that was dug out, and then behind it they've got the marks of where the next line trench would have been. So these bits that might just look like pathways actually show you the layout of where the dugout is beneath the ground here. So that staircase we looked at is just here, and this is where it would have run. So you can see the dugout is beneath us right here, running down in this direction and then running across over here. So here we go. This is what the layout of the dugout would have looked like. We talked about pumping out water. Well, here we go. This right here is where the pump room would have been. Over here we've got another in-cove. This is the command post, I'm assuming. Then as you move further down, we've got other rooms here. A bunk room where some of these guys would have been able to take turns sleeping. I know that's crazy to think about, but guys would have slept in places like this. Another bunk room here. So again, all of this is just beneath us, right? It's crazy to think about. Then we go into other sections of the dugout as well. The project to uncover the trenches in the dugout here was actually filmed and turned into a BBC documentary called The Forgotten Battlefield. And I really recommend checking that out. I actually didn't think to check like where you can see it, but I will try and find it and I will link it in the description below. I watched it, really interesting, and I really recommend that you check it out as well. Sadly, of the 155 casualties here, it was only possible to identify one of them. A French soldier by the name of Francois Metzinger. He was fighting here in 1915, and based on the kind of war diaries and stuff from his units, it was identified that his date of death was the 21st of May 1915. He was buried alongside the other French soldiers found here at a French cemetery, and I apologise for getting this name wrong, but I believe it's called St. Charles Potsy. I'm going to put it on the screen here because I will have butchered that name, and I apologise. The German soldiers were buried at Langemarck, and the British soldiers were buried just near here in Cement House Cemetery. So again, when you come here, make sure you take the time to check out the information board. So they talk a little bit here, and you can see some of the photos of some of the stuff that they found when they were getting down into this dugout. Also got some information about some of the other different bits they had here. Around 180 such dugouts were built in the Ypres salient. Wow. So something worth doing is just giving us a little bit of orientation to kind of where we are here. So to give you us an idea, this piece that we can see in front of us here, this is the original 1915 trench. The British then moved forwards and captured that international trench that we talked about, and then when they came back, I guess maybe this trench was not in good condition or wasn't usable, and that's when the Yorkshire trench was dug later. So this is the 1915 position, and this is the later trench. Again, just for orientation, the front line was this direction, so the German lines were over in this way here. That's also why the dugout goes down and is underneath us, because you would want the dugout entrance facing away from the enemy, because otherwise if it faced that way, you'd have the ability, for an artillery shell to come straight into the entrance of it. So just to help us orientate ourselves a little bit around the site. So just looking a bit more at a couple of these information boards, this is really interesting here, because look, you can see where we are right now. This is the Yorkshire Trench, and this is the map of how it looked. Wow, that's really interesting. When you see it like that next to each other, all these ants in trying to invade our trench, you can see how interesting somewhere like this is. You can directly see how the two come together. So this is another really interesting board. So you can see basically a diagram of how this all would have looked. So there's the section of trench that we've walked through, and we saw the two dugout entrances, one here, and then over where we've walked through and discussed these different types of rooms, you can see this is how they would have looked. So a carpenter's room. We talked about the various bunks where the guys could have got a little bit of sleep. That was the punt room over there. We talked about the command post, which was down at the far end over there. And then where this dugout would have run down beneath the trench line itself. This is cool. I mean, look, I know it's like almost cartoony, but man, this is so good to help you kind of really understand what's going on around us here. So look, I hope you found this video interesting, taking a look at the Yorkshire trench and dugout and telling a little bit of the story of what happened here. This is a smaller site and it's a slightly funny to find one because it's in the middle of this industrial estate. But when you come here and you look around and you learn a little bit of what happened here, it's a really interesting site and one which I don't think you should overlook if you come to Ypres and want to see some Great War sites. This is a really good one. So come here, read the information boards, have a look around. Definitely worthwhile. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, do all the usual YouTube stuff for me right here. Thank you very much for watching. I'm going to see you on the next one.